Do you find that of the cultures and religions and mysticism that you've studied, that they're all basically saying the same thing, perhaps just in a different way? And if so, why the different ways?
Because of their culture and the times and their environment and their belief systems, their collective belief systems. I think if Buddha lived in Jesus' time, he would be crucified as well. Because he was a blasphemous. He was what we call a conspiracy theorist. Saying ye are gods, like that's a blasphemous. Who are you to say ye are gods? Yet the Bible says we're made in the image of God. But I think Meiser Eckhart, the Christian mystic, said the mystics will understand, theologians will argue. Because they tapped into their divinity, they had direct experience with the divine or source or God. And I think that's what a mystic is, someone that has direct experience.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. We have Booboo Garcia with us on the show today. Booboo's a spiritual seeker, writer, and host of the Broader Lens podcast, where he explores ancient wisdom, higher consciousness, and humanity's cosmic origins. His journey began in struggle, marked by trauma, gangs, and addiction, until a profound awakening when he glimpsed nirvana. It's going to be fascinating to hear how ancient texts and personal spiritual experiences shaped his transformation and new way of life. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now, let's go talk with Booboo. Booboo, welcome to the show. I'm so delighted to have you with us today.
Thanks. It's an honor to be on. Thank you.
You bet. You say you've had a glimpse of nirvana. How? What happened?
I also say mystic from the hood because I grew up in the neighborhood in Los Angeles, and I had a lot of mysticism come after that event. But yeah, a glimpse of nirvana. I was in a lot of suffering. I was suffering from alcohol addiction, and I was caught up in this thinking, feeling, drinking loop, and I didn't know how to get out of it. I was like a prisoner of my own mind and body, and I was stuck in this state of being. And the only thing keeping me alive was alcohol. But what happened was, like Carl Jung would say, "There's no coming to consciousness without pain," or Eckhart Tolle will say, "At the beginning of all addiction there is pain, and at the end of all addiction there is a pain." And what happened to me is I was in so much pain, I finally woke up. My last night drinking, I blacked out one more time, and when I drink, I think I'm Tupac, Bruce Lee, and Boy George all put together, joking around. But I was in so much suffering. It was a big shooting, big old chaos, like my whole life has been from that point. And then I woke up, and I woke up in a state of nothingness. I was in a dark place where I was beyond the five senses, and I was in a state of pure consciousness, I guess I can say. I want to say I had peace and joy and like all that inner, bliss, but I don't remember that part. But I just know I was in a state of nothingness. And as fast as I was in that state, I snapped out of it, and I'm back into the five sense reality. And I went back into my suffering, but something shifted in me. I was no longer the person I once was. I knew to the deeper depths of my being that I was no longer going to drink, party, and live the way I was living. I had a shift in consciousness from that point. And the word nirvana means to extinguish or blow out. I had a brief moment of ego death, and also some of that old sense of self, those layers were gone.
So what do you think happened? Where were you when you were in the nothingness? Can you describe that to us? Was it just like you were in this black room, or what happened? And then what do you think caused the shift?
I have no idea, just a lot of pain finally woke me up. But my friend was in prison when I got sober, and after like a year of doing this sobriety thing and trying to live on a spiritual basis, he called me from prison, and he described what happened to me. And he said, he was with me that night, and I blacked out. I didn't know what was going on. And he said that I was in the room, I was in my buddy's apartment. He let me stay there because he knew I was homeless. And he was in a rehab himself, but he let me stay there. And my buddy was with me that night, another friend. And he heard me in the room, and he said he described it as I was fighting with demons. I will hear a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, and then all of a sudden it was quiet. And that's all he remembers. He goes, he was so afraid to even open the door from the noises he was listening. Maybe I had some entity attachments were releasing from me. I have no idea. But he did hear that silence as well.
Wow. Did he tell you how long it lasted, the episode?
He did not. We were talking briefly from when he was in prison. He eventually 2 years ago he died. He OD'd, but
I'm
he
so
was a really
sorry.
good childhood friend of mine.
Yeah. No. Tell us what it's like growing up on the streets in the hood in LA or anywhere. Tell us about your childhood and what you faced before you reached that nothingness. And also, I forgot, what's nothingness? Can you describe nothingness to us?
I had a couple different experiences with being in a state of nothingness where there was no like conditioned state of mind, no thinking really. It's just beingness. And so I was beyond the senses and I was like in a pure state of consciousness. There was nothing else going on. I didn't even have feeling or thought of going. I was just I emerged with the allness of life, like in a pure state of consciousness. I had that experience in Ohio as well when I was working in the on a job site. I looked through a flower because there was no restrooms, and I fell into some state where I was in a state of nothingness again, and I was out of my body. I had an outer body experience during that time, but I guess the best way to explain it is I was outside of my senses. I was beyond my conditioning, and yeah, I was in a pure state of consciousness.
Did you see anything? Was it all dark? Was it light? Was it
When I was in Ohio, I seen me merge into everything. Um, Whether it's with the trees and everything, I just merged into it, and it kind of felt like, you ever see that movie, The Predator, where, he's hiding, he's, like, cloaking into his environment, and it's like you could see, like, this frequency, like this it's really, it looks like the environment is clear, but it's just, like, moving fast. Well, that's how I seen everything, but I felt like I was merged into everything, everything was one.
okay? Thanks. Tell us about what it's like to grow up in the situation that you grew up in as a child and as a young adult.
What's interesting is, I like calling myself spiritual gangster because I had a spiritual awakening later, and I lived the gang life my whole life. My dad was shot 5 times in 2 different occasions. He was sliced in the face. He looked like Scarface, so I was always ashamed of my parents in open house and stuff in school. My mother was sliced in the back over 50 times, always like she wasn't afraid to be violent if she had to, and we lived that lifestyle. It was normal to us. Um, and growing up, it was just rough. I felt like the monsters, my family, and I was always ashamed. I didn't feel like the normal kids. I already felt different. I had my dad would beat me, and today, I look back and I know my parents did the best they could with the tools they had, and if they would have known better, they would have done better. But my dad he did drugs, did alcohol. That was all in my house. My house was the party place. I would be playing outside with the normal kids, and next thing you know, my dad's friends are arguing and someone's getting stabbed. And, I didn't know how to process that kinda stuff. I didn't know how I talk about toxic masculinity, and some people will try to defend that with, divine masculinity, and I agree with that as well, but toxic masculinity is when I don't know how to when I suppress my emotions, boys don't cry, be tough, be this tough guy, be the best at everything, and what if I can't do that, What if I need to cry? And that created that all that stuff went inside me, and but next thing you know, I need to find ways to get out of myself, just to numb myself, and I found that in 1st grade when I punched a kid for saying calling me Yogi Bear and Booboo, I punched him and I felt some relief then. I had to be the best at sports because I felt less than, so I had to portray myself as better than. So you're picking me first when I'm playing basketball or playing football or baseball, or bowling, but yeah, so it was just really rough, seeing my parents divorce, and I had, abandonment issues, all kinds of different stuff going on, seeing my mother with another man when my dad's in prison, or just going to see my dad when he's busted and going through that process in concrete cells, and seeing feeling the energy of people. But what's crazy living in that environment is that I've always had this glimpse of remembrance of other lifetimes. I had this deep connection of India. I remember watching Indiana Jones for the first time. Whether that's a staged environment, I felt like I've been there before. It gave me some kind of remembrance. Even in watching those old kung fu movies in the 80s on the regular TV and they're translated, I knew I lived in that kind of environment before. I had this inner knowing. So when I had my awakening years later, I went back to those teachings.
We were watching the Alabama-Auburn basketball game over the weekend, and one of the Alabama players did the what's his name? Pierogi or Minogi or whatever, the bird pose. After he scored, like, a three-pointer or something that won the game, and he did that, and the crowd went nuts, and I think that that has been around now for decades with those Karate Kid moves. It's reminding me of that with you mentioning that what do they call that bird pose where he you know what I'm talking
I know what
about?
you're talking about, but I don't know the exact name. No.
Yeah, he raises his arms and stuff. Were you an only child, Boo Boo?
No, I had 2 redheaded sisters. I'm Irish and Mexican.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
but, I I look back and when I joined a gang, it wasn't because I wanted to be a bad person. I wanted to be loved. I wanted to feel a part of and feel like a somebody, like I meant something, I was somebody. So with that comes all kinds of stuff, that I wasn't aware of, but I just wanted to be a part of. So I put a friend request in the neighborhood, and the friend request is not on Facebook, but on in the neighborhood is when the guys surround you and they jump you into a gang and they beat you up for several minutes. And I finally felt like I was a somebody.
Do you think that all of that, all those years of gangs and trauma and all that jazz has prepared you for your current mission?
I believe so. I remember having a dream when I was a kid of the Night Stalker. I don't know if you heard of him, Richard Ramirez. And I remember having a dream of him telling me to get in the sewer, and on top of the sewer was a gate. If I walked in, it would close. And it was in dark. It was all darkness, and it was rats and snakes and stuff. And he was telling me stuff, but I couldn't hear him, but he kept telling me to approach him, come closer to him, and then almost immediately had a back-to-back dream where I see this divine character with the white robe, but I couldn't see the face in it because of the sunlight, and he was in a room, all 3 sides of the rooms were green, and the other side was like the sky with light, with the sunlight of the spirit, and I had the most active gang members at the time that I knew of were following me to this room. So when I had my awakening, I think that's part of my purpose is just to help people, um, look at things from a broader lens.
Mhm. Yeah. You also talk about that you had a shared death experience with your father. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my father came back into my life, because he left when I was a kid, and, it was so painful, so much hurt when he left, those abandonment issues. When I was a little kid, I didn't know how to process that stuff or talk about these kind of things, so I felt it was my fault. If I would have been more lovable, he would have stayed with us. And, my dad comes back into my life, and by this time, he's a changed man. He had a tattooed teardrop right here, and he got it removed, and he's talking different, living different. He was a mechanic, and he wanted to work on my El Camino one day. But a couple days before that, he was in the emergency room. I had to give him a ride, and he laid out his whole life, and he apologized for this and apologized for that. We were in Long Beach at the emergency room, and we were there for hours, and he just laid out his whole life, and I couldn't comprehend what he was trying to do at the time until I had my awakening. But I felt death around the corner for him. I felt this death, and I remember calling my sister saying that you might want to spend time with dad. I don't think he's going to be here much longer. So Sunday comes around, he knocks on my door. I just get home from partying all night, and he wants me to go to church with him, and I don't do the church thing. But I said, "Come back after church," and hoping he didn't come back, and he came back, and his younger brother was flying a remote control and in the cliffs in San Pedro, California, right on the coast, and it got stuck, and we decided we're talking debating on going to get the airplane. So we walked a couple steps down, and we decided not to go. My dad took a couple more steps, and he slipped off the cliff, and I
Oh,
just seen a
goodness.
pile of dust, and I ran about a mile away where there's a staircase going all the way down to the rocks, and as I caught up to my father, I grabbed him, and I just remember seeing a real tear in place of his teardrop, and somewhere along the line, I had an outer body experience or a shared death experience, I come to realize, and, I seen everything outside my body. I was looking at everything from a whole different, like, scene, like, if, like, a movie scene just went up to the sky and I could see the whole big picture, and I seen the firemen, the police officers, people overlooking the cliffs, looking trying to look downwards, and I seen me and my uncle holding my father and them running to us, and later, as when I had my awakening, I started to have a lot of the Hindu scriptures come to me, and the Hindu scripture talks about how the self doesn't die. And you talked about it. I watched a clip of you saying, just as a candle cannot live without fire, man cannot live without a spiritual life. And you touched on that, and it made me like smile. I love that quote, by the way. Um, but yeah, so I had a shared death experience with my father where I realized that he didn't die, and I think that was his way of showing me. And, but I was in a lot of pain after that. I felt double abandonment issues now. He comes back into my life and now he's gone. I didn't blame like a god or anything. I was just really hurt and I didn't know how to process that stuff. So my anger escalated. And then I went through more deeper darkness and addiction. And I went through that route and a lot of suffering and it finally woke me up. Another experience is when a girl got murdered because of me. Guys were shooting at me and she got shot in the head and it was really hard, and I just really leaned more and more to the drink because I didn't wanna feel I think alcoholism or addiction is not a disease. I don't really agree with the disease model, but I believe it's an attempt to escape human suffering.
Wow. Big statement there. Because I know you've been involved in the 12-step programs for a while,
Yeah.
and that's what they teach basically, that it's a physical addiction. Say more about your thoughts about that.
I think the 12 steps, it was written in 1939, the big book, and, people don't realize that the Rockefellers had their hands on the 12-step program before even the book was even written. And, they created this education system and this, you know, they rewrote history and they control the narrative, and I think there's a recovery matrix that they created as well, and people don't have to agree with me, but where people don't really get well, they just continue to go into this all these rehabs cost lots of money just to go to a rehab, but, the disease model, I think it just misses out on the real problem, like our trapped emotions and our resentments, our deep what's deeper within the resentment, the trauma and the trauma imprints and how it affected us at a deeper level. And I think once we heal our traumas, we could straighten up mentally and physically and spiritually.
How does one heal their traumas?
I can't speak for everyone, but I could share on myself. I went through the 12 steps and I highly recommend outside help as well for people. But for me, I found everything through the 12 steps and a little bit more suffering and more looking outwardly and learning from spiritual teachers. I had a lot of mysticism teach me how to love myself, which I never was, like I said, wasn't raised with religion or spirituality. I think the only time we went to church is through a service or like a holiday or someone a funeral service. But so my parents weren't religious or spiritual. But for me, it's really just learning how to shift my perception. In step four, I in the 12 steps, I learned, like Wayne Dyer says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And you hear people have near death experiences that talk about this life review. Well, when I went to the fourth step, I started writing down my resentments on people that I had with people, places, and things. And then I put myself on stage with these people, and I started to um I went into the crowd, I pretend there was an audience, and I started to look at things from a different angle and start questioning stuff. Where do I feel hurt and threatened and why? How do I want this person to portray, uh, act towards me, with this audience looking, and I started to question and see how I created this persona or like just questioning my parents. Like I don't know my mother's darkest secrets, but I can only imagine growing up the way she was brought up and she didn't have a father in her life, my dad as well. And just questioning and trying to have understanding gave me compassion. And especially when I started to understand how things affected me, my relationship with my environment from my outer to my inner. And that that itself created a lot of compassion and understanding in myself, which I call knowledge, spiritual insight. I started to develop by questioning that stuff. And so I can try to have more understanding for people. Like when I was in Ohio, one day I'm at the gas pump and I'm experiencing a lot of racism, right? Not with everybody, with a lot of people, but it can be contagious if you're not aware of it. Because now everywhere you go, everyone's racist if you're not aware of that, because that's how the mind will take you. And one day I'm at a gas station and people made some comments and said stuff, but I realized what they were. I went into their being, if that makes sense, their own mind, and I could understand what they were thinking, and making assumptions of. When I really understood that, I didn't react to them. I become more life sensitive versus ego sensitive, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I don't think ego's completely bad.
No, I think we need ego to survive,
Yeah.
really, and but to be able to change a perspective, a lot of the time gives us a clearer picture of what's going on instead of just whatever their reaction is, especially if their reaction's in fear. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I always say the ego's not your amigo when you're unconscious of it. I was unconscious of my ego for a very long time, meaning my different identities that different labels that I hold on to and belief systems that created this sense of self, the persona. And so I was unaware of it. I was so caught up in my thoughts and my emotions for the longest until I started to separate myself little by little. Um, but there's always hurt, there's always pain under the drink for the alcoholic or for the drug addict. And I don't think there's a difference in the 12 step community can be. It's been hard for me to stay there because of the dogma. And I think I heard you talk about mysticism. You asked the lady, what is the mystics, the mysticism mean to her? And I think it's the mystics move beyond the belief systems and the dogma, and they have that shared oneness. That's why I love that verse, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Not a deity, but see the source of life in all beings. And I have so many different experiences with that, just having these mystical experiences.
Yeah. Back to the SDE, the shared death experience. What's the difference between an NDE, a near death experience, and a shared death experience, in your opinion?
What's the difference between a near death experience and a shared death experience? Well, a shared death experience, I can only speak on my little experience, is that I merged with my father's spirit, where I can understand where the Buddha says there's no self because we're all the self. The self is in all beings. Um, my friend Nicole Lindy, who's a psychic medium, she calls it a soul blending, and I blended into my dad's soul. But a near death experience, I've never had one, so I couldn't really tell you. Um, you hear all these different terms, and I almost feel like what happened to just a basic awakening these days. I know in the near death experience communities, a lot of them talk about a near death like, but a spiritual awakening for me is a spiritual death. It is only by dying that one awakens to eternal life, St. Francis says. And I think a spiritual awakening is a death. It's not a near death like, it's a death. It's a spiritual death, in my opinion. But as far as a near death experience, I have no idea the difference. I just know that I had my shared death experience with my father, and a lot of the Hindu scriptures came alive to me when I had my awakening, and they confirmed what I experienced.
Can you say more about that, what you did experience when you look back at it? You said your soul blended with your dad's. Can you describe that for us? Give us an idea of what it felt like, what it looked like, how long it lasted, what happened? Is that enough
Yeah,
questions for you?
yeah, I don't know the exact time, but because like in a timeless state, I guess. But I just seen everything outside of me. I was outside of my body, and I could see the whole picture, the whole scene from a elevated state of consciousness. And yeah, I just realized that there's no such thing as death. We don't die. What happens? It's kind of like the wave hitting the shore. It looks like it's gone, but it goes back to the ocean of spirit. And I think that's what an awakening is as well. It's enlightenment for the wave is the realization you are water, not the wave. You are a part of the ocean. But when I had that experience, I realized my father didn't die, but it's really just seeing everything outside of me. And I think I merged with my father, and maybe that's his way of showing me that he didn't die.
And that he loved you enough to let you merge with him,
Yeah.
is what I just got off of that. Yeah, beautiful. So you had your nirvana experience. You had your shared death experience with your dad. Sounds like you were still using when your dad died. And then you had your nirvana experience, and then you started getting into the spiritual side of the equation, I'm gonna say. I really wanna do a deep dive into that because I know that you're into a lot of different areas of spirituality. Can you give us an idea of the trajectory from the time when you had your awakening to where you were led, how you were led, what you experienced, what were the different texts and cultures and religions that you studied along the way?
Yeah, after like a year of sobriety, I walked into the 12-step community. After a year of sobriety, I started to dabble outside of the 12-step community. And Rumi has a quote that says, "What you're seeking is seeking you." And I had a lot of mysticism just come to me. I had a guru that appeared to me in spirit named Yogananda, I come to find out. And I didn't know who this guy was until later. But I remember trying to, like, because I didn't know any better. I just went to a big church in Torrance, California. I went to service and I sat down and I heard the preacher preaching. And all of a sudden I hear a voice say, he doesn't know what he's preaching. So I went I got up automatically. I just got up and went to the gift store and asked for a Neil Donald Walsh book because a week before that, I was in Target and I seen a DVD. Was it a DVD or CDs? Oh, a DVD. It was a DVD, and it was like everything got dark and a light was just on this DVD. And so I bought the DVD and I watched it. It was Neil Donald Walsh, so I was looking for his books now. So I was in, and he was on the no buy list. They even looked at a list, and then I asked for a Gandhi books, and they said they didn't he was on the no-buy list either. And I was like, "Whoa." So
Meaning
I
don't
went
read this stuff because
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
bad or it was
yeah.
evil or it was
It it
whatever?
it goes against the word of God.
Oh, please. Yeah.
So, I went to a Unity church for the first time, and there was a guest minister from San Diego, and he started talking about Yogananda. And it seemed like there was a period of time everywhere I would go, I would hear about this Yogananda guy. And then I started to see his image. The first time I went to Self-Realization Fellowship in Pacific Palisades in California, I sat down and I seen the lineup of gurus like Krishna and, Jesus, but Yogananda's picture was glowing to me like it was alive. And I think that was his way of telling me, it's him. And I just had this inner knowing versus the mind. Nothing was telling me in the mind. It was this sense of inner knowing. It was him. And I started to get into his teachings. And it makes sense because I always felt like I lived in India at one time. And now I'm getting this divine guidance from a guru from India. And so I started looking into the Gnostic gospels. I love the Gnostic gospels. I think
Please
there's,
explain what the Gnostic Gospels are to those who don't know.
well, they didn't call themselves Gnostics. They
Right.
went against what the church taught and they challenged the church. There's a phrase in the Gospel of Philip, "Man made God in the image of man," and that I think that's pretty amazing. But for me, the Gnostic Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, that came to me. It was found in 1945, untouched by man, and which connecting with what Yogananda was saying, he was bringing back the real teachings of Christ. He died in 1952, I believe, and they didn't translate the Gnostic Gospels, until later. But so Yogananda had no idea what they said in the Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, but they were teaching self-realization. Jesus is telling you to go within. There's a gospel, I think it's verse 24. There is a light within a man of light, and he lights up the whole world. If he doesn't shine, he is in darkness, which goes back to the candle verse that you had with the Buddha. Um, yeah, the Gospels were about self-realization, and I think Yogananda was right on that. So I started to dabble in.
Were those the ones, Boo Boo, that were found in the jars by, like,
Yeah.
some shepherd boy in the middle of the desert or something?
Yeah, in Nag Hammadi library, they called it, and it was a 6-foot jar, and there was different gospels in there, and they
I've seen
believe.
some of the fragments, like, when they toured the US and they went to different museums and you could go see them on the old-fashioned papyrus, and it's amazing that they've lasted that long.
Yeah, it is, and, they believe that whoever wrote the Gospel of Thomas is older than the Gospel of John, and they were competing with each other. That's why the Gospel of John made Thomas being the doubter. Like, they were, like, competing with each other, and there were certain parts of the Gospel of John, and I don't remember offhand, that were added much later, like the Trinity part, which I find amazing. So we don't know who wrote the Gospels, none of the Gospels, pretty much, um, as far as the 4 Gospels, which I find interesting, but, for me, what's more empowering is the Gnostic text, because it's really going within, and they talk about being our forgetfulness. It's our forgetfulness that creates ignorance, forgetting who we really are. I don't know if you ever heard that Hindu, story about the gods and the human beings, where they hid the divine spark within us from us because of the fact that we were abusing our power, so our divinity, so they decided to hide our divinity, and they were, debating where to hide it. Should we put it on the mountain? No, they'll eventually find it on the top of the mountain. Should we put it in the ocean? No, they'll eventually start to, explore the ocean, so they'll find it there. Should we put it on the moon? No, they'll eventually find their way to the moon and to the stars, the cosmos. So Brahma says, "Let's put it inside them, inside their heart. They'll never find it. Only those that are ready will find it." And I love that, and I think that's what the Gospel of Thomas teaches.
Do you find that of the cultures and religions and mysticism that you've studied that they're all basically saying the same thing, perhaps just in a different way? And and if so, why the different ways?
Because of their culture and the times and their environment and their belief systems, their collective belief systems. I think if Buddha lived in Jesus's time, he would be crucified as well. Because he was a blasphemous. He was what we call a conspiracy theorist. Saying ye are gods, like that's a blasphemous. Who are you to say ye are gods? Yet the Bible says we're made in the image of God. You know, um, but I think Miser Eckhart, the Christian mystic, said the mystics will understand, theologians will argue, because they tapped into their divinity. They had direct experience with the divine or source or God. And I think that's what a mystic is, someone that has direct experience. I don't believe, like, people go to all these Bible studies and they believe like there's one meaning to the scripture. And here's an example, if you don't mind me sharing it with you.
No, it'd be
About
great.
about a month ago, I was walking my 2 dogs at the lake. And I'm walking my 2 dogs at the lake, and, there was a young father and his young daughter. And, he must have been in his probably mid-20s, and his daughter was like 3 years old. And they're looking at the lake, and we're walking the trail, me and my 2 dogs. So you would have to turn around to see us. So his little daughter turns around, and I just seen, like, pure bliss, pure state of consciousness, looking at life in motion without any filters. She's just in a blissful state of all. To enter the kingdom of heaven, you must be like a little child. Her father turned around, and I seen his filters. I don't know exactly what his filters were, but I could see him looking through his lenses, and he had a totally different experience from his little daughter. And I'm like, wow. And I seen that so clear. I'm like, who else has those experiences walking their dogs? But I had so many different little experiences like that throughout my daily life. Just seeing him look at through the lens of the filter, going, being protective father, and just all different experience than his daughter. It was such a beautiful way, just to experience.
I love that. You also are really interested in hidden history. What all comprises hidden history, in your opinion?
Well, I've always been fascinated with that kind of stuff. The Sumerian tablets, as you hear, how do these stories connect? Like, I was in Egypt a couple years ago with Tony Browder, he was the first African American to have a site there, and he's been digging there since 2007. But he's been going to Egypt, ancient Kemet since 1979. But what's interesting is like we hear the Greek terms in Egypt, but what do they mean in the African terms? And like meta nature means, we hear about hieroglyphs, but what the meaning of meta nature in the ancient African term, what meant words of God. And I think well, is that where the biblical writers got God's word? Or in Hindu scriptures, it says the song of God? Or trying to look at like who was Atlantis? Who were the Lemurians? Who were the Maya people? Where did they come from? Were there ancient aliens that really seeded humanity or genetically modified us? Like just asking these questions. I've always been interested in that kind of stuff. Like Noah, who was Noah? Why is he Zia Sutra in Mesopotamia? Just questioning who's holding these handbags? Why are they in Mexico? Why are they in Africa? Why are they in Mesopotamia? Like just something there's so much we don't know. I think there was so many different cycles of life than we're told. Like Christopher Columbus, for an example. The Greeks knew about the Americas before Christopher Columbus or the Christian era, from what Manly P. Hall says. So just so much not that we don't know.
So what do you think? What's your hypothesis at this point with the Lemurians and the Atlantis people, and what do they call them? Atlantans?
Yeah.
Atlantis people and the star seeds and all that jazz. What have you come up with kind of a working hypothesis that you're exploring further?
I think staying open-minded and just knowing I don't know and continuing to search and question the Emerald Tablets. You hear about the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean,
Tell
and
us
I
about those.
was
What are
telling
they?
for they were found. Well, they weren't even found. Dr. Dorrell kind of, I think he said he channeled them or found them, and I don't know the whole story, but we don't have a physical book, and they became famous today. But where's the physical book of the Emerald Tablets? There's an Emerald Tablet of Hermes, but where's the Emerald Tablets? So people are making money off of this, and there's some profound stuff that's written in there. Don't get me wrong; you can always learn from these writings. But as far as a physical Emerald Tablets, I don't know that we have one. Um, And why does it sound like King James? Like, it sounds like the James version of the Bible, which if there were 36,000 years ago that these Emerald Tablets were supposedly written, then why are they sounding like the King James version of the Bible? Why would he even use that verbiage in the Emerald Tablets? So, but there's some great, writings in there. There's some you can learn from it. There's some spiritual insight in that book, don't get me wrong, but as far as, the real emerald tablets, I'm not sure if there was one, so but I just always try to stay open, those elongated skulls, looking at some of the Mesopotamia stuff in Ecuador, why is that stuff over there? Why does this ruin look like in Cambodia look similar to the one in Mexico? Just trying to just question things and learn. I think that's something I love, I live for today is just being a spiritual seeker. So it's just always fascinating to me learning about this kind of stuff. Or even I've heard you talk about the leprechauns and stuff. The Maya people talked about the Alush people, these little not these little beings that come to mainly children. They're little small little dwarf like beings. So I just always been fascinated with that kind of stuff. I think yeah, I don't have a mind that just uh, after my awakening, people ask me who plays for the Raiders and all that stuff, and I love watching the game, but I'm not driven to watch it anymore. Like I have so much. I have a mind that's always trying to connect the dots.
I do think it's interesting, speaking of the little people, the experts call them elementals, I've learned recently, and the gnomes and the elves and the fairies and the leprechauns and whatever the other names for the little people. And furthermore, you've mentioned the ruins. I think it's fascinating that a lot of people don't know. I didn't know this until a few years ago that there are pyramids all over the world. And a lot of them are lined up in latitude and longitudinal coordinates that mimic one another, there's no way that's just random. There's not a chance that that's random. And furthermore, those pyramids, a lot of them, especially in the Middle East and in Europe, they have water. They have streams or rivers running through the bottom of them, and they're
Yes.
energy generators. So I think, okay, what's happening there? For what are they generating energy? For whom? What's going on with that? And I've heard some experts, self-proclaimed experts, say that they believe that it was kind of like a galactic internet communication system that was used because of those coordinates and the way they were lined up with the stars. Do you have any thoughts about that? Have you looked into that?
No, yeah, I've looked into it. I'm just always fascinated. I just stay open minded, but there's so much that we don't know and we're not told. So yeah, I agree with you. But yeah, they can explain it a lot better than I can. I got to recently. I was swimming in the cenotes where supposedly the meteors hit when the dinosaurs died. All went. And that was a beautiful. I don't know if you ever been there in the cenotes, but there's
Where
just so
is it?
much stuff.
I
It's
never
in
even heard
Mexico.
of it.
Yeah, they call them the cenotes, and there's like beautiful turquoise looking water, and there's greenery. You're like in a little cave, but you could tell like a ball of a meteorite type um, thing hit it, and it's deep down within the earth now. But you
And
can
where
go
is
swimming
it?
in it. It's in Mexico by Yucatan
Oh,
Peninsula
wow.
area. Yeah, Chichen Itza, all over the Chichen
I've heard
Itza
of
area,
that.
Tulum. So yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I don't understand all that stuff, but I just go to the places it feasible, yeah. It is. If I really wanted to do a deep dive on it, I just talk to the spirits and beyond and say, "Hey, what was going on? Show me a scene." And we can do an instant replay of what was going on back then. And we all have the ability to do that, to go into the past lives because, time isn't a thing in the spirit worlds. You go frontwards and backwards and wherever and get information. We can talk to anybody we want, whether we know them or not. It's irrelevant. Doesn't matter because it's our spirit connected in with their spirit. So I need to teach you some more woo woo so you can connect with all these different entities and find some answers to these different things that you're so fascinated in. And because it's certainly a black hole you go down. That's
Wow.
a fascinating black hole but an interesting one. What do you find the commonalities, though, and how do they affect human existence in all of these unseen historic things?
How do they affect human existence? I That's a good question. I just think it's there's so much that they knew that we don't know. Um, and if we can continue to question, I think it connect us back to our oneness. Um, for an example, like the ziggurats in Mesopotamia, why are they looking exactly like the Temple of Kukulkan? You
What's a
know,
ziggurat?
it's the Mesopotamia ruins that we
Okay.
don't really hear about, and they look almost identical as the Maya temples. Like, is there a connection there? Again, going back to those, what's in those handbags? Why are those handbags in Mexico just like the Sumerian, um, you know, cuneiform writings, the text? Why do we still have these same handbags? What's up with this pine cone that you can find in Mexico or Anu's holding in a glyph? So it's just if we can like connect the dots and question stuff and continue to move beyond mainstream archaeology, I think it'll bring us closer to each other. I think it'll bring us closer to our divine oneness instead of looking at each other like white, black, Mexican, Democrat, Republican. There's so much more to life. And I think that's what Blessed of the Pure in Heart is. It's really a deep awakening beyond the labels, beyond the belief systems. And and the narratives that we create with our own conditioned state of mind and society. And I think that's if we can do that, I think we can start to love each other more and become more united. I think to make America really healthy again, and I'm not talking politics, but just in general, is really to get the people to love each other again. Bruce Limpton will be quick to tell you that, when we live in fear versus love, it has the opposite of effect on the mind and body. And the more we can learn how to love ourselves, we can love each other. Um, I was telling Neil Donald Walsh the problem with love thy neighbor as thyself is most people don't love themselves anymore. We're
Mm.
constantly being fed fear. We're on survival mode, us against them mentality. And it's creating a lot of collective trauma. That's why addiction has expanded far more than we know. There's just so much addiction, but it starts with us loving each other, how we speak to each other. I don't see how we can't. I think these spiritual principles must come first. Um, and I'm not saying to force people to live on a spiritual basis, but if we can be more kind, more mindful, more aware, and question things and try to practice more understanding. There's a lady in the 12 step community who's a good friend of mine that passed away, and she would always say, "May others treat me tomorrow as I treated others today." And when you actually can try to live that way, we change our reality. Y- we change everything. And that's what I love the word you know, in the 12 step, it says being restored to sanity in step 2. Well, sanity means healthy and insanity means not healthy. And I got to look within myself for what's creating unhealthiness and what's not healthy. Um, what's healthy for me. So I got to watch the way I speak to myself, be more aware of that inner critic. Um, take responsibility for my daily behaviors. And sometimes I'm going to mess up, but I needed to screw up to grow up a little bit more. I don't have to be hard on myself. So I think practicing to love each other and how we speak to each other, how we look at each other, and having understanding is probably the most important thing we need today in today's world. Sorry, I went off.
No, no, that was profound. Do you think people are becoming more or less curious about spiritual topics and why?
I think they're coming more curious, to be honest. Even though it's still hard to talk in public about these kind of things, it's been hard for me to connect with people in public about these kind of things. But I love these kind of podcasts where I can connect with people like yourself and that I can learn from. But I think we're having an awakening more and more. Yeah, people are starting to question the old paradigms, whether it's in the 12 step community, religion, Christianity. A lot of these people are challenging the old belief systems and paradigms.
Yeah, I agree. What inspired you to begin your Broader Lens podcast?
I think it's kind of hard to have an awakening and not want to be more helpful to humanity and really try to create a new narrative for humanity, a new story, instead of continuing to watch all these fear-based movies and news and all this kind of stuff. Like, let's look into deeper stuff. Let's look at more about history at a deeper level. So let me get Freddie Silva on, or let me get Marianne Williamson to talk about a different perspective on Jesus, or someone that had a near death experience and share about that beautiful life review. I wonder if that's like the weighing of the heart of the Egyptians, when they would weigh the heart. Is that a life review? So just questioning stuff like that. And yeah, I think that's how we can expand, by questioning and trying to understand things without dogma, without taking things too seriously, and just be open-minded with the open-minded heart.
The Egyptians used to weigh hearts.
Yeah, they have a story about the weighing of the heart, which I don't know it the full story, but when they would die, there would be a weighing of the heart. For me, I like to look at it as the life review because you hear it's so beautifully explained by people that have near death experiences. And that's what I got in the fourth step. I was telling you that, like, just questioning and living on learning how to live the 12 steps on a daily basis. I learned to have a daily review throughout my day. I have a life review at night. What can I have done better? Look at all my experiences I had throughout the day and just question that kind of stuff. That's what made me a better and more loving person that I've ever been. I've never been this way until I found the spiritual way of living. That's why I love your quote about the Buddha. The candle's purpose is to light. to give light, but it can't give light without fire. Likewise, like in the spiritual, without spiritual awareness, I was just living in ignorance. That's why I love the word ignorance because it's an extension of the word ignore. And the more I ignore my daily behaviors, I became an ignorant person. But for me, spirituality is taking responsibility for my own life. In Buddhism, awareness, mindfulness, and wisdom are can be they're metaphors for fire, and the fire burns away and transforms the ignorance within ourselves.
One of my favorite words is woo woo. And woo woo, and I started using that really early on, boo boo, woo woo. And the interesting thing is, a few years ago, my dear friend Sun Ching, who's a Taoist priest, said, "Well, woo in Taoism means source." He said, "So you were right on it from the beginning, woo woo." And I said, "Oh, I had no clue. I just thought it sounded good, and it kind of takes people off of their opinions right off the bat because it's funny. A lot of people, you say, "Yeah, I do woo woo," and they're kind of chuckling. So it reduces that, oh, she's a witch or she's a whatever. Yeah. So along those lines, woo means source.
I
And I
love
thought,
that.
okay, that works. In the ancient Chinese and the Eastern traditions, it means source. So who knew? I guess whoever was telling me to use the word woo woo, the spirits and beyond. From all of the many diverse topics that you discuss on your show, if you had to choose one topic today that intrigues you the most, what would that be?
I would say spiritual awakening. I really love learning about spiritual awakenings and different parts of spiritual awakenings. People have different experiences because it's not just a one-time event. At least for me, I've had little awakenings, broad, big awakenings, but really, how do we understand these awakenings, and how do we look at how does it shift our worldview and our way of living? I love learning about spiritual awakenings. I think they're not near death like experiences. They're death, spiritual death. It's a spiritual death to a new.
New way of looking at something.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do you think everybody has them, whether they recognize it or not?
I think so. I think we all have our own little awakenings. You can call it a psychic change or whatever, but yeah, I think we all have them. I've had number of different. I had an awakening watching The Walking Dead, the very last episode, watching how they had this shared human experience, their shared humanity, looking beyond the skin colors and the belief systems. They were surviving and living amongst each other and developed deep friendships. I went into a state of oneness. I was at the market right after I watched this show, and I had tears driving as I'm driving to the market because I could feel that my whole being glowing, connected with everything, whether it's the cactus that I'm passing by or the rock, to the people walking in those stores, whether they realize it or not. I could feel it, I could see it, I could sense it, and yeah, it's just a beautiful experience that I've continued to have these types of experiences with that unity consciousness. I don't focus too much on the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh dimension. I just know that we we experience these altered states of consciousness, and it's just a beautiful thing. It really is, and I wish more and more people can have them.
I think people are having them, whether they realize it or not. They are they are having them. And I often find that screenwriters are really spiritual. And
Mm.
there's all kinds of hidden gems in a lot of these movies that we see. Do you find that to be the case as well?
I'm grabbing something.
He's grabbing something for those of you that are listening. Avatar. He's got the Avatar book.
This
Yeah.
this this is the guy I went to Egypt with, but he breaks down the movie Avatar in this, and he does a beautiful, beautiful job. Tony Browder.
And what does he say?
Well, I mean,
Just
just
give us a synopsis.
connecting the word avatar for an example. That's a Hindu word. You know, divine, God incarnating into this form, right? Um, but he's also sharing that indigenous cultures believed in already. It's sharing the different from Africa, from the Maya people, sharing the characters, like that lady, what's her name? That's in Avatar. Her name's Grace, um, Dr. Grace Augustine, in which is named after the Saint Augustine, and the story behind her, and just it's just really yeah, it's just a beautiful book just to look at. They had to channel these certain things. They're very spiritual. They even Star Wars, had to a lot of stuff's manifesting, and when I was a kid, I didn't bring that up, but I've always felt I lived there before in that type of environment. Um, and, like, I just had this inner knowing, like, how is all this stuff coming, like, the Jetsons, remember that the cartoon, The Jetsons? How do we have the technology now? Or you hear about The Simpsons, how do they know about future events? Just they had to they're channeling something deeper for sure. Yeah.
I believe every writer, author, composer, painter, whatever, we're all channeling. Everybody's channeling because everybody's had the experience where they'll write something, whether it be a piece of music or a paragraph on a book or something, where they go back and they read it and they think, I don't remember writing that, but it's pretty good. And you hear, if you ask them, they'll go, yeah, that happens a lot. And they talk about, especially novelists, they talk about how the characters come alive and the characters talk to them and they kinda take on a life of their own. Well, what are they doing? They're in different dimensions with these characters that are coming into being, that they're bringing into reality on the page, perhaps, or on the movie screen, but they have dialogue with these characters that they create in their minds. How's that work?
You're right, and what's interesting is, Krishna is considered an avatar in Hindu tradition, or Jesus. Some of the Swamis consider Jesus as an avatar, or the Buddha and other avatars. And the Navi people in that movie say, "I see you." The Maya people, a lot of the from Africa to the Maya people, they would say, "In Lakesh," which meant, "You are another me, and I am another you." See, they were more in tune to the oneness, even in that movie. They had that tree, the tree of life. So I don't know, just yeah, just a beautiful spiritual movie.
Yeah, interesting. Last question, why do we incarnate?
To experience, to experience. I always say perhaps we are God, witnessing God through the lens of human experience, infinite awareness, momentarily shaped in finite form. And I think the more we experience and grow, maybe the consciousness of God continues to expand. But I think I come to realize that the deepest part about being an alcoholic is being a human being, and the deepest part about being human being is my oneness with God, and the deepest part about my oneness of God is to love others. Ernest Holmes once said, you know, we are to look for this God in each other, loving this God, forgetting all else. And I think when we go back to our shared oneness and realize that we're not the waves, we're the water, I or I and my Father are one, we can see the divine in all things, and we can start treating each other. We can create a whole new narrative. And but I also know that we need to have our experiences, whether we call them bad or good, in order to continue to expand and grow. I think that's the whole purpose of life, is really to experience. And if this is a dream, why not create a beautiful dream?
Beautifully said. Wow, you are remarkable, sir. My goodness, what a story and what a wise man you are, and brilliant in so many ways. I love that you're being led to explore all these ancient texts and ancient civilizations and cultures and putting them all together and then relating them to the now, if you will. So you are absolutely on a mission from God. Maybe you were a blues brothers in a past life. Yeah. And goodness, what a remarkable conversation. My hat is off to you for all the work that you're doing. Speaking of which, how can people learn more about you and what you're up to.
You could find me on YouTube at Broader Lens Podcast.
Okay. All right. We will do that. We will put that in the show notes. Everybody, there's lots to unpack here. My gosh, what a wonderful conversation, Boo Boo. Thank you for enlightening all of us and sharing your wisdom with us and sharing the rough parts of your life as well and how you've come out of it. I mean, that is to be commended right there, if nothing else. So I wish you all the best and continued success on your journey. In the meantime, sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama, mwah, and from Arizona too, where Boo Boo is. We'll see you next time. To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.